Thank you all for clicking on this video. I just want to give a little PSA to any returning subscribers who may be clicking on this. This video is a compilation of sorts of all of my hard work, blood, sweat, and tears that I have put into Arcane as a product over the last few months. I edited it all together to kind of make a one-stop big cut of all of my work. That way if anyone clicks on my page, they can see all of my Arcane content right there in one video. As you can see from the title, this is only a part 1. I'm going to be making a part 2 to this series when I do some more characters and some more moments from Arcane Season 2, so that will be coming out eventually. But yeah, that's all I got for the pre-ramble, and I hope you enjoy the video. Now that it's been a few weeks since the conclusion to Arcane, and I've had some time to really think and sleep on how I feel about the show and the story as a whole, one thing is for certain: I am definitely not satisfied with how a lot of these characters were concluded. Beyond just how their stories ended, however, there are a few that I think just were handled terribly in Season 2, and none of these stick out more to me than Violet. On my most recent rewatch of Season 1 of Arcane, Violet was a standout character for me. Next to Silko, she was probably my favorite, and that's because as I got older and rewatched Arcane a few times, I started to relate to her more on a very personal level. Being the older sibling that left home and hasn't really properly interacted with his old family in a long time gave me a really great understanding of what Vi was feeling as a character. The overwhelming of responsibility and guilt that Violet has in Season 1 is so heartbreaking. She blames herself for an overwhelming amount of issues that happened in Season 1, and a lot of them aren't even her fault and it's stuff she had no control over. More than this, especially after Episode 4, she is a very active character. She was a character that always kept the ball moving, and the way Violet was somehow interwoven into every single plot point in the show was just unbelievable. I mean, when you really think about it, think about how many amazing relationships this character has in Season 1. She has a relationship with Jinx as her sister. She has her friendship with Ekko. She has her guilt and responsibility with Vander, Milo, and Clagger. She has her actual relationship with Caitlyn. She's very interwoven into the Piltover and Zaun political feud. She even gets a little team up with Jace towards the end of the season. Beyond that, we get some really amazing fight scenes with her and Sevika, where we have a lot of great development on display multiple times throughout the season. And I was really excited to see where they were going to take Violet in Season 2. And while there isn't a quote-unquote main character of Season 1 of Arcane, you can definitely make an argument that it is Violet. And then, tragically, this kind of all disappears in Season 2. I feel like a lot of this comes down to just not enough time was given to the character, but off the rip, I did not like her joining the Enforcers in the way that she did. Violet just pumping the Grey into the Undercity, I felt was just a total assassination of the character and everything she stood for in Season 1. Now, I know since that episode, it has kind of been told to us that that wasn't the real Grey, there was like a lightened version, I believe. I could be wrong there, but regardless, it just feels so out of character for Violet to be pumping gas into the Undercity to the point where she has to wear a gas mask when she's going down. But beyond that, the way she switches from wanting to kill Jinx one second to being on her team and fully in support of the next one was just really jarring to me. I feel like the whole active role that Violet had in Season 1 is kind of just gone in Season 2, and even though I know a lot of you aren't going to like this point, in a lot of ways she just became Caitlyn's love interest. And the next point that I'm about to make might lose me some subscribers, but it's okay. The sex scene between Caitlyn and Violet has to be one of the most tone-deaf decisions that I've ever seen any studio make. I want to make this very clear. It's not because it's two women having sex. I do not care about that at all. Trust me. My issue with the scene is the fact that right before Violet does this, she finds out that Jinx is probably going to unalive herself. Jinx walks away saying she's going to break the cycle, all depressed. If I'm in Violet's shoes, if my little brother were to look at me like that and say that to me, I would be having a mental breakdown. And so would be the Violet from Season 1. When Caitlyn comes down and opens up the gate, Season 1 Violet would have sprinted out of there at Mach 10 trying to find Jinx at any cost. And this could have set up such a beautiful scene where Violet and Jinx sort of reconcile in a way, and she comes and talks Jinx off of the edge. But instead of great storytelling, we just get some fan service. I also feel that Violet's relationship with Jinx is never properly concluded. And while I understand that Jinx faking her death and not really giving Violet that level of closure is a form of closure, it just didn't work for me. I feel we really needed a heartwarming scene where Violet comes to terms with Jinx as she is, accepts that that's her sister, and yet still loves her for that and will always back her. All in all, for a character that once was a main character to kind of get pushed to the background to more of a side character role and have none of her major plot points tied up properly and neatly was a real bummer. Especially as someone who was looking forward to Violet's development as kind of a reflection of what my own development in life would have been, this really hit a little too close to home. And sadly, Violet isn't the only victim of this writing, but that's a video for another day.
Know where to find me. Blisters and Bedrock.
If he found this, everything might have been different.
Bullshit. So both the creators of Arcane Season 2 and the fandom of Arcane Season 2 believe that if Silko received Vander's letter, everything would have changed for the better, all of the death and destruction could have been avoided, and it would have been a happy fairy tale world for the most part. And I just fully believe this isn't true, and in order to draw this conclusion in the first place, you have to categorically misunderstand both Silko, Vander, and their relationship as a whole. And in all honesty, I can see a reality where Silko receives this letter and actually becomes more infuriated with Vander than he already is. The first thing I want to go over is what this letter is actually saying. And to sum it up, it's basically just an I'm sorry letter from Vander to Silko. But herein lies the issue. The main reason that Silko is going after Vander has nothing to do with their own personal gripes. It is quite literally because they have a major ideological difference and Vander is standing in Silko's way. I feel like many Arcane fans might actually forget that Silko offers Vander a chance to join him. Right when he first drags him to his lair, he offers him a chance with Silko, and he probably would have been Silko's right-hand man. It is only after Vander denies him that Silko becomes disgusted with Vander, where he then drops the bar.
But you won't fight for one.
Another major issue that Silko has with Vander is in a way he believes him to be a hypocrite. He believes that Vander is lying to himself. That underneath the loving father and the protector of Zaun, that is still the Hound of the Underground. The unstoppable warrior of Zaun that is just filled to the brim with pride and ambition. Silko believes that in Vander working with the Enforcers, he has given up on himself and he is lying to himself. And in a really toxic way, I fully believe that Silko actually respects Vander for going as far as to kill Silko. Because even though it comes at the cost of Silko's own life, he respects the ambition, he respects how far Vander was willing to go for what he believes in. And that love and hate, that push and pull, that disrespect and respect that Silko shares for Vander is what pushes him to try and kill him in the first place. It has near nothing to do with forgiveness, and the issue is significantly larger than anything that that note tries to address. And one rationale that I'm going to use to explain to you why Silko might actually be more infuriated by this letter is it is again a moment of Vander compromising his beliefs and not doubling down. Something that at this point in the story, Silko views as a sign of weakness, something that he believes Vander shouldn't be. So in all actuality, if Vander himself were to hand this note to Silko, he would read it, probably go, oh well, okay I guess, now what? In terms of the actual issues at stake, in terms of what Silko actually fully believes in, this letter changes nothing. So even though a lot of you are probably going to call me arrogant for this next statement I'm about to make, I don't really care. The creators of Arcane Season 2, in this moment per se, did not pay attention to the story they were telling in Season 1. So now we are left with this idea that basically everyone believes, and in reality, it just doesn't work, and it doesn't make any real sense.
I knew you still had it in you.
I've always liked the name Violet.
A general fan favorite moment in Season 2 of Arcane is when we find out that Vander is actually the one that named Vi, that Silko was kind of Jinx's godfather figure, and that they all knew each other before any of this went down. And while at first I too thought that this was really cute and just added a whole nother level of tragedy to the situation, I now believe that it's kind of bullshit. So I'm not sure how many of you know this, but the writing team in between Season 1 and Season 2 changed drastically. They cut a large majority of their writing staff and really didn't put as much time and energy into the script as they did for Season 1. By the end of it, they literally had like 3 writers. It was crazy the amount of people they removed from this team. And what that leaves you with is Season 2 telling a very different story from Season 1 and coming to very different conclusions. During the opening scene of Arcane Season 1, which is one of the best opening scenes of all time, might I add. Through the eyes of Violet and Powder, we see Vander, this man who we don't seem to know at this point. There's this no large embrace, there's this no oh my god it's you moment where Violet and Powder run into Vander's arms. Instead we get this beautiful moment where Vander realizes the damage that he has caused and decides to go about this in a different way, seemingly picking up two girls that he doesn't know and walking with them towards the light, towards a potential brighter future. And unfortunately, the Blisters and Bedrock flashback cheapens this scene. Instead of a man just holistically coming to terms with what he has done and deciding to pick a better future for two children that he doesn't know, he's actually just on the hook. This is something he had to do anyway because he made a promise. I also find it sort of ridiculous that in those 3 episodes there is no mention that Vander has ever told Violet or Powder about their mother, about the fact that they were friends. But beyond that, the character that this really doesn't work for is Silko. In Season 1, Episode 3, Silko is absolutely hell-bent on murdering all of the children, including Violet, who he would know is the daughter of his best friend. It also doesn't make any sense that he'd be criticizing Vander for taking in these children and insulting him about it if he knows the reason he's doing it is because he's on the hook. And you have to remember, Silko is not just an evildoer, he has very conscious reasoning behind his actions. More than anything, Silko respects people with large ambitions. He respects people that are willing to die for the cause, that are willing to fight for the cause. And you really mean to tell me he would now disrespect one of his best friends who died for the cause by trying to murder her children? Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't really make sense. Beyond that, when he turns the corner and sees Powder for the first time, he doesn't seem to know her. He just says, "Hello, little girl." He doesn't seem shocked to be seeing a familiar face. He doesn't give any emotional response indicative of that he knows who this is. I've also seen countless people make the argument that the reason Powder jumps into Silko's arms is because she's familiar with him. But if that's the case, why on earth would he be so shocked when she does it? And if he truly did know who she was, he would immediately try to leverage the fact that she's familiar with him. Silko's entire arc that he goes through in Season 1 is a reflection of what Vander goes through in the first episode. It is a man coming to terms with the costs of his ambition, a man choosing to father a child that he does not know, and growing as an individual because of their adopted child and adopted love. And I believe the Blisters and Bedrock scene retcons a lot of this, because it sums up all of their complex journeys into they were just on the hook the whole time anyway. This wasn't something they chose out of their own free will, out of the goodness of their hearts. It's they promised something, they were on the hook, and they just had to do it to keep their word. So like many other scenes in Arcane Season 2, I believe Blisters and Bedrock to unfortunately be indicative of a writing team that did not care what came before it, and just cared about telling the story they wanted to tell, not the story that the show wanted to tell. Just so unfortunate. There was once a time where I too was fooled into loving Isha. She was just so adorable, her relationship with Jinx was really cute. I mean, she reminded us of Powder, right? And all I kept thinking about was how concerned I was for her well-being approaching episode 6. But then I realized something unfortunate. Isha is not a character. She is a plot device, in the absolute worst way possible. And before everyone goes, oh my god, they're all characters, they're all plot devices because they're in the story, just hear me out for a sec. Isha's role in the story is quite literally just to ruin Jinx's mental health. Allow me to explain why this doesn't make any sense. At the end of Season 1, Jinx's mental health is probably in the worst state it's ever been. After unaliving her second father figure and murdering many members of the council, it's safe to say that Jinx is in a very difficult spot at the start of Season 2. She is quite literally lost, she is homeless, and she has no direction in the world. And while I personally am still not satisfied with how she was in the first 3 episodes, if we were following the path that Season 1 was on, Jinx is in a terrible spot mentally after the end of Season 1. Then she meets Isha, who for all intents and purposes fixes Jinx. After spending a few months with Isha and kind of becoming the big sister / mother figure for this character, Jinx changes for the better. She is now the hero of Zaun. Her schizophrenic outbursts have seemed to disappeared for the most part, or at least heavily regressed. She's able to hold stable conversations, she's able to hold stable relationships, and all in all, she seems very adjusted to this new lifestyle. And while I personally don't buy Jinx just being fully adjusted by Isha falling into her lap, that's a conversation for another day. And then we get to episode 6, and just when things seem like they're going a-okay for our characters, everything goes to shit. So now I'm going to break down for you the elephant in the room, Isha's sacrifice. In episodes 5 and 6, we have seen that Vander or Warwick has taken a liking to Isha. Again, bullshit for another video for another day, but alas, they like each other. They're family now. And I see what the writers of Arcane were going for here. They're gonna have Isha sacrifice herself to protect her loved ones, and at the same time, kind of finally put Vander out of his misery. Let Vander die with whatever little bit of dignity he still has left. But you see, the funny thing is, right before Isha sacrifices herself to kill Vander, we are shown that Vander is gone. Whatever bit of Vander that was still there burns away, leaving only Warwick. So Isha isn't doing a mercy to a fan-favorite character, instead she's just unaliving a monster. And she does this for the sake of protecting her family. But the unfortunate thing is, none of this works. Warwick just comes back stronger and better than ever, and because Vander is now dead, Singed is able to use his blood to revive Victor and make him the Overlord. A large part of Ambessa's forces aren't harmed, and she seems to have more by the time the final war comes around. So in terms of the actual physical effect Isha's sacrifice has, there is nothing. She just makes the situation worse. And this is where her being a plot device really comes into play, because the only reason she existed was to absolutely destroy Jinx's mental health. But the thing is, before Isha entered the plot, Jinx was already, or should have already been, at this state. Jinx was and should have been lost, depressed, definitely guilty and possibly suicidal, all prior to meeting Isha. So the writers of Arcane had Jinx in a specific position, and then they decided to move her from position A to position B for the sole reason of getting her back to position A. Why not just leave her there? Isha is quite literally just a plot device that has no actual real-world effect, and the only emotional effect she has was something we already accomplished. And what is so insane is, aside from Jinx just being sad, no one talks about, mentions, or even thinks about Isha. He is just gone, evaporated from the story. A child quite literally unalived themselves, and no one is talking about it. How do we not even have a 1-minute scene where Sevika approaches Jinx and talks about the fact that a fellow loved one that they both loved died? This has to be one of the most infuriating topics for me in Arcane Season 2, because I was quite literally tricked into loving Isha for no reason. She is unnecessary. She serves no point in the plot. Isha was just a lousy reattempt to capture the shock and impact of Milo and Clagger's death. And you know what? It would have worked if they actually made her a fully fleshed out character. And fair warning, for my next video, I might even be slightly more irritated than this one, because we're addressing one of my favorite characters, and how he too just poofs away. One of the most egregious moments in all of Season 2 of Arcane is how Heimerdinger literally poofs away. One of my absolute favorite characters from Season 1. A character that, while seems simple on the surface, is actually deceivingly complex, really funny and likable, and most importantly, integral to the plot of Season 1. Now, I'm not sure how many of you actually remember this, but Heimerdinger is actually the leader of the Council in Season 1. Not only is he the leader of the Council, but he's actually the founder of Piltover. So isn't it a little strange that he is not once mentioned or asked about in all of Season 2? And from the moment that Heimerdinger gets fired, everything seems to get worse. So during the chaos that is the first 3 episodes of Season 2 of Arcane, you think someone, I don't know, maybe Mel, would ask where Heimerdinger is so he can come in and help them out. Since he is the founder of Piltover after all, and at this point in time they are running quite low on council members. But when you actually look at Season 2 as a whole, it makes sense why he's not mentioned, because not only is the council irrelevant, but the actual whole Piltover Zon storyline is irrelevant. This also probably has something to do with the creators of Arcane themselves saying that they really didn't know what to do with Heimerdinger this season, because to be quite honest, they just sort of never really liked him to begin with. So for a large part of Season 2, he kind of just becomes some sort of comedy relief. Until we get to the fan-favorite Episode 7 where his character is finally fully assassinated. I say finally not because this is something that I wanted to happen, but this is something that the creators wanted to happen for a very long time now. And the moment that we run into Heimerdinger in Episode 7, the assassination begins. Christian Link, you are really going to tell me with a straight face that Heimerdinger, one of the smartest people in all of Piltover ever, and one of the kindest people, really spent over a year doing absolutely nothing to save his world? I would say one word that really describes Heimerdinger in Season 1 of Arcane is concerned. He is very concerned for his pupils, he is very concerned for his people, and he's very concerned about the well-being of Piltover. Did this concern oftentimes go too far and lead him to not take actions that he should have, specifically when it came to Zon? Absolutely. And therein lies his flaw as a character in Season 1, which is why his arc at the end of Season 1 is so fascinating, because he actually goes to the place that he's been neglecting, realizes his mistakes, and wants to do something for the better. So it seems very out of character for someone who is very concerned and very caring to just not care about his homeworld and not try anything to get back. I understand that he was waiting for Ekko, but how on earth did he not have anything prepared for when Ekko eventually arrived? Now how they were both lucky enough to land in the same universe is beyond me, but hey, that's a video for another day. But then somehow through the use of science, magic, and a music video, they build a time machine. And then when Ekko goes to test it, they make a joke out of possibly killing Heimerdinger. Haha, the classic explosion joke, so funny. What makes the scene even crazier is that they actually kill him by the end of this episode. And then when they go to start the time machine, lo and behold, it isn't working properly. And then they give you the classic older teacher saving the student at the cost of his own life trope. And then for some odd reason that is never properly explained, Heimerdinger just connecting two tubes causes him to disintegrate. And then to make matters just all the more worse, no one gives a shit. Ekko gets back to his universe and pretends like this never happened. No one questions where he is, no one asks what happened to him. There is no memorial or funeral service for the founder of Piltover. And Ekko's final scene is spent reminiscing on his girlfriend that wasn't actually his girlfriend because she's a different person in his universe, instead of reminiscing on the person who sacrificed himself for Ekko. What makes this even crazier is none of the fans seem to care either, because at the end of the day he was just some random yodel that was used to make us laugh, right? He wasn't an actual character that was very integral to the plot of Season 1. But alas, that is the full story of my favorite fuzzball from Season 1. It is what it is. Thank you, Christian Link, for a great season of Arcane. Now, all things considered, I can unfortunately say that Season 2 of Arcane was pretty well received by the general fandom. I would go as far to say that people like myself who do not like Season 2 of Arcane are in the minority. However, that being said, one plot point that I've almost noticed unanimous agreement on is Mel's, with the agreement being that there just was not enough time in this season to really give her a full story arc with what they were going for. And to be quite honest with you, I feel that is putting it very lightly. Now for me personally, I think Mel's story arc in Season 2 is an absolute catastrophe. And the number one cope that I've seen people use is, well, it's going to be explained in the Noxus show, so it's okay that it's not fully completed and done in this show. But all of a sudden, just a short month later, that Noxus show is not confirmed to be coming out, and no one really knows if it is. And also, to be quite honest with you, I think the cope that, oh, it's going to be fixed in another show is just a ton of bullshit. I wanted Mel's story arc to be completed in the show that she is currently in. So let's very quickly go over Mel's story arc in Season 2. Now, I believe it starts off relatively reasonable considering where she is at the end of Season 1. She is now kind of the head of the council, and she's trying to put the pieces back together. She is doing like 20 different things at once with trying to keep the peace and keeping her mother in line. And throughout the first 3 episodes, her arc is decently reasonable. But then we go from 0 to 100 as fast as humanly possible. She is quickly and suddenly thrust into this Black Rose plotline, in which she goes on a very rushed and very predictable journey of discovering that her brother isn't actually real and has been dead all along. Then, these powers that she did not know she had, all of a sudden she has and can use pretty well, becoming some like full-blown mage sorceress goddess. And as you can see, we have already jumped a ton of steps from where she ends in Season 1. I really feel we were owed a legitimate explanation to what is going on with Mel, other than a ton of vague exposition. Maybe if we had another season or two, this plotline could have worked, but there was no way in hell we were squeezing every plotline into this very short season. And then it seems like all of a sudden Mel is sort of working with the Black Rose. I am not quite sure why she is trusting this person, I am not quite sure why she's just taking what she's saying at face value and moving on, but hey, there is not enough time, so we're running with it. Now, for some of you, this might be a nitpick, but how in the hell did Mel get back to Piltover in such a timely fashion? How did she know what direction to go in, and did she just walk the whole way there? Did she like power walk all the way to Piltover? But moving on, somehow Mel is teleported right back to Piltover to meet Jace in the council room, and if we had a few more minutes, this scene could have been really interesting. And if this show was given more time to cook and the pacing wasn't just egregious, I actually think this scene could have been really well done. It could have been Mel and Jace the relationship that once was, because if you guys didn't remember, they actually had a really interesting relationship discussing the ways in which they've changed, and trying to figure out together what role they play in this new crazy world. But instead it's glanced over, because wow, do we have a war to start. But before this scene ends, we're given a very key moment of dialogue, where she says she doesn't fully understand her power and she doesn't have full control over it. I have absolutely no clue why they decided to include this, because this just isn't true. She is an absolute beast with her magic with no training. Because then the war starts and she is just the MVP. The mage who doesn't know how to use her powers properly somehow protects Caitlyn in the split-second moment behind a wall. Then she beats who once was a great character, her mother Ambessa. Then, in a very weird and unexplained way, backstabs the Black Rose and seemingly gets rid of them. I'm not really sure what happened here, because I don't think the creators really knew what happened here. And now that this awfully paced war has come to its conclusion, she is going back to Noxus. She is done with Piltover, and her story is for another show. And to put it bluntly, this character story arc was just flat out awful. There was just simply not enough time to squeeze this bullshit into this story. And the cope of, oh, it's going to be explained in the next show might not ever happen. So yet again, thank you Christian Link and Arcane Season 2 for taking one of my favorite characters from my favorite shows and throwing them in the dumpster. But anyways, thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow for the next video. When Ambessa was introduced in Season 1 of Arcane, the world immediately became far more interesting. Not only was she great from a world-building perspective, but she also created multiple levels of new complexity for the characters we already had. By this point, we had already known that Mel had a complicated relationship with her family. What we weren't sure of is why and to what extent is their relationship suffering. So naturally, Ambessa comes in and basically rocks Mel's world, highlighting the strength of not only Ambessa's character, but complicating and making Mel's character stronger as well. But this doesn't just happen with Mel, this happens with multiple main characters in the Piltover storyline. She gets inside of Jace's head and starts to convince him to weaponize Hextech, further straining the relationship between Jace and Victor. And overall, I think the best way you can describe Ambessa in Season 1 is fuel on a fire. She walks into the story and makes a already complex situation far more complicated, all while keeping her true motivations somewhat ambiguous. She hints to Mel that she is doing this for the greater good in her own eyes, but we really aren't 100% sure at this moment. And probably the most complicated and compelling part of Ambessa's character is the love she has for her family. She claims to value her family above all else and doesn't really care if the whole world has to burn as long as her family is kept safe. And this is not only something that's completely understandable, but it's also very relatable. It goes a long way in humanizing this otherworldly character. Beyond that, her physical prowess in battle is symbolic and representative of what she actually believes in. She values ambition, might, and hard work above all else. And that is why, even though many of Mel's beliefs and political maneuvers go against Ambessa, Ambessa still loves and somewhat respects Mel even more for doing so. Because even though it actively makes Ambessa's life harder, she has a great deal of respect for someone who stands for what they believe in, recognizing that her daughter in many ways has become the wolf she always wanted her to be, and both valuing and understanding that Mel did it without shedding any blood. But regardless, when push comes to shove, Ambessa believes her way is the right one, and she is more than willing to push the boundaries of what is morally acceptable in order to do what she feels is right. I've heard a lot of people push the idea over the last few months that Ambessa was supposed to fill Silko's shoes as the main antagonist of Arcane. But at least in the direction that Season 1 was heading, this just couldn't be further from the truth. She was set up as a character that was supposed to antagonize and complicate certain events, but not to be the actual end-all be-all villain. And going into Season 2, she was one of the characters that I was most excited to see, because in all honesty, I didn't see a way of them messing this up. I honestly believe that even in the worst case scenario that she isn't as well done as she is in Season 1, we would still have a pretty well developed character with interesting motivations. But to my shock and disappointment, they found a way to absolutely brutally murder this character in cold blood. So you know how in Season 1, one of the biggest parts about Ambessa's character is her love for Mel? So understanding that, how on earth does she barely mention the fact that her daughter is nowhere to be seen? Her primary focus is weaponizing Hextech, which I can understand, but at the same time they're diluting her character. She isn't trying to weaponize Hextech to protect her family, she's trying to weaponize Hextech to seize power. And she's not trying to seize power to better her family, she's trying to seize power for the sake of seizing power. They dumbed her down to just angry villain who wants to be in control of every situation imaginable. Another major aspect of Ambessa's character in Season 2 is her relationship with Caitlyn. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I actually thought this could have been really cool if done well. Ambessa using a main character's grief and anger to weaponize them and manipulate them sounds pretty interesting on paper. Only problem is, the only amount of interesting development that could have happened happens off-screen. And this is only worsened by the fact that Caitlyn is one of the most wishy-washy characters I've ever seen put to screen. But that's a conversation for another day. And this disastrous relationship comes to a head when Caitlyn captures Violet. This scene is stupid. The hyper-intelligent Ambessa from Season 1 would have smelt this betrayal from a mile away. We know from previous scenes that Ambessa is aware that Caitlyn is unsteady right now. To further the point, Maddie is an actual plant by Ambessa. So she was drip-feeding her all of the information regarding Violet and Caitlyn's relationship. So not only do they dumb down Ambessa by not making her aware of this betrayal, but there is no continuity regarding the information she understands and has available to her. And then, the show has the audacity to give Ambessa of all people a stupid-ass villain speech that gives Violet the opportunity to fight back. Keep in mind, this is the same character who lopped off a girl's head in a split second, and she wasn't even an immediate threat to Ambessa. If this scene was playing by Season 1's rules, Violet would have been dead in a second. But that can't happen because Violet is a profitable main character and this show does not have the balls that it used to. Unfortunately, however, the worst of Ambessa's character assassination has yet to come. Still no mention of Mel, by the way. Ambessa teaming up with Victor and his zombie robots shows me that the writers have a categorical misunderstanding of the character they once created. Ambessa hates magic. It is why she is going against the Black Rose in the first place. She views it as an utter abomination, because she views it as the antithesis to grabbing power with your own two hands. The Ambessa we have in Season 1 would hate what Victor is doing. She would probably even find this more deplorable and wrong than what the Black Rose is doing. And I fully believe that Ambessa would actually drop some of her ego and join forces with Piltover to stop Victor because that's how far it goes against what she believes in. But instead, she joins forces with it. One question I keep asking myself is, did the producers and writers of Season 2 of Arcane watch the first season? This is the last thing that Season 1 Ambessa would have ever done. And what's even crazier is there's still more damage left to be done to what once was the great character, Ambessa. The most major part of Ambessa's character is that she loves and values her family above all else. At least that was the original idea for the character. So why on earth would she put Mel's life in danger? Mel was everything to Ambessa. She was her reason for existing, she was her reason for fighting, and she is perfectly fine with killing her daughter in combat. What happened to the deal of respect that Ambessa had for Mel? Do you remember the amazing line where when Mel is questioning Ambessa about why she forced her out? And Ambessa responds with, "Because you weakened me. Because I couldn't bear to see the look in your eyes when I did something that I had to do for your own good." Now let's have a real one-to-one for a second. I'm sure that in your own personal life, one of your parents has said, "I'm doing this for your own good, this is hurting me more than it hurts you." That is how I view Ambessa in Season 1, and that is how I view this line. A parent that is okay being hated by her own children as long as they are okay. Someone who fully and holistically believes they are doing the best thing they possibly can for their children in this moment in time. And that is why I loved this character so much. I really felt they hit the nail on the head when it came to describing this type of parent. A type of parent that is probably the most difficult to deal with because they're extremely narcissistic and toxic, but they believe they are doing the right thing for you. And during this final confrontation between Ambessa and Mel, there is no sign of what once was such a beautiful and amazing relationship. Something that was meticulously and properly handcrafted to make you feel something. Instead, we just have a faceless, soulless, flashy final battle. And then, they have the audacity to play with your emotions and act like these are the same characters, by delivering to you one of the most tasteless and undeserving lines that I've ever heard. You are both the fox and the wolf. You do not have that luxury anymore. That line is not yours. Those belonged to very different characters in Season 1. And what makes this all the more worse is I have seen so many people, so many quote-unquote fans of Arcane, not really caring about what happens to Ambessa because she wasn't a main character and they didn't really like her. But you know what? I still remember, and I will never stop loving these characters from Season 1. And by the grace of God, if this video ever lands on the radar of a producer or writer of Season 2, I want you to know something. I will never forgive you for dismantling and destroying what once was my favorite TV show of all time. Because in the pursuit of greed and making as much money as humanly possible, you failed to do good. Caitlyn has to have one of the worst character arcs that I have ever seen put to screen. And what specifically bothers me about this character compared to everyone else is it really could have been good. But the disastrous pacing issues, questionable character decisions, and jumping to some horrible conclusions just absolutely destroyed what could have been a great character arc. Caitlyn has one of my favorite arcs in all of Season 1. It is a girl who has been pampered her whole life coming to the harsh reality of what the real world looks like. She is a character who is on a mission the moment you meet her. A detective-type character that is trying to put together a mystery. And as this mystery unfolds, she grows as a character. Discovering the truth about what was really happening in Zaun, and learning that her pampered lifestyle was not something that everyone experienced. She was a complicated character that was finally starting to understand the nuance of the world. Not everything is black and white, and very often people aren't just good or bad. Combine all of this with her budding relationship with Violet, and you have a character that's actually going against the grain and trying to do the right thing. And going into Season 2, I was really excited for where they would take this character. I was really interested to see how the death of her mother would challenge her as a character and what conclusions she would draw. And on paper, the concept of Caitlyn being manipulated and slowly descending further and further into madness sounds really cool and interesting. Except for the fact that she quite literally goes from 0 to 100 as fast as humanly possible. In less than a week, she goes from being in full support of Zaun and what they're doing and their freedom, to gassing them like something straight out of World War II. And what's even crazier is she is gassing them indiscriminately. There are plenty of innocent people being caught in the crossfire, all because she's being blinded by rage. And again, if this was something that was built up over a season, maybe this could have worked or at least been better. But the speed and brutality of this action is just so out of character. Caitlyn's mother was going to try and help Zaun with the vents. It was something that she stood for, something that she believed in. And Caitlyn using this love that her mother had in her heart to harm people is just so evil. It is completely and utterly out of character, and it is so disrespectful to the legacy that her mother was leaving behind. Now the next thing that I want to speak about is her becoming a dictator. Again, something that could have been interesting if it was given the proper time. Caitlyn being manipulated and pulled by Ambessa in a time of emotional distress, again, sounds really good on paper. Unfortunately, however, all of the potential interesting development and back and forth between the two characters when they discuss morality happens off-screen. At the end of episode 3, Caitlyn seems to be fully buying into what Ambessa is offering. And when we get back to her in episode 4, she's already doubting Ambessa and her principles. Now, it is implied that Caitlyn puts Zaun and Piltover under martial law in between the time jump, but there is a famous saying when it comes to writing: show us, don't tell us. So instead of seeing all of this interesting development, we already see Caitlyn at the end of it. And this makes her inevitable flip back to Violet's team just a short 2 episodes later that much more jarring. It feels like every time we interact with Caitlyn, we are interacting with a different character. There is no tonal consistency with her, and there is absolutely zero continuity in terms of the way she feels regarding certain characters and certain moments that happened previously. Then fast forward to Act 3, and she's kind of just back to normal? All is forgiven between her and Violet, yet again, off-screen, and now she's just our badass Caitlyn who's here to fight. One of my favorite aspects of Caitlyn's character in Season 1 is her relationship with Jace, which is something that the writers either forgot about in creating Season 2 or just don't give a shit about. Because even though they are shown to us to be kind of brother and sister, they get no conclusion together, actively making both characters worse. And then, after Caitlyn somehow holds her own against Ambessa in hand-to-hand combat, she's just back to normal and everything's good. She's even somehow forgiven Jinx off-screen because she's perfectly okay with her escaping, and her and Violet quite literally put everything behind them again off-screen, and everything is good. All of the meticulous development and nuance that takes place throughout Season 1 is thrown out the window in Season 2. Her development in Act 1 is an absolute disaster, and all of the potential complexities that should have spawned from the way she was acting in Act 1 are either quickly glanced over or flat out ignored. Phenomenal work, guys. You did it. You've somehow killed all of my favorite characters. One of the most unfortunate character assassinations in all of Arcane Season 2 has to be Vander's, specifically because he was one of the few characters going into Season 2 that already had a full arc. They already did such amazing work with him, and for the most part, if they just left the character alone, he would have been a phenomenal character at the end of Arcane. But with all that being said, when I found out that Vander would be coming back as Warwick, I was pretty excited. Now, even though I have never played League of Legends and never will play League of Legends, I cannot deny that this was a really cool idea in concept. Vander coming back as some sort of monster and coming face to face with his long-lost children sounds pretty interesting. I was definitely nervous that they were going to possibly overdo it, which they definitely ended up doing by a long shot. But what really shocked me about Vander's character development in Season 2 is how they actually went back and killed Vander from Season 1 without having anything to do with Warwick. Now, the first thing I'm going to go over, just because it's the simpler of the two, is the issues with Warwick himself. There's really no other way to say this. This character just felt cheap. Right off the bat, I noticed they changed the character design from the League of Legends game to the TV show, and I think the reason they did this was just to make the audience feel something. And even though this doesn't destroy the character, this is already a form of a cop-out, and it's a sign of what's soon to come. They had to make Warwick more Vander-like and more human-like so that the audience would feel more for the character. It would have been much harder and much ballsier to actually make him the Warwick character from League of Legends. And if they had went and done it and actually been successful, it would have made the character far more impressive, but they took the easy way out even with the character design. The next major issue with Warwick is how he comes to in the most convenient moments for our main characters. Right before he's about to do some significant damage and actually become an interesting character, they pull back and let him just become Vander. And it's not like he's sort of like Vander or he's a mix of Vander and Warwick. In these moments where he's just straight up hugging Violet and Powder, that's just Vander. They quite literally just give him two separate personalities, displayed through this super cringe light that changes colors depending on his mood on top of his body. And then what really stinks about this character is how they keep killing him and bringing him back in different ways. They just keep edging you with the idea that Vander is going to be coming back fully just to kill him off then bring him back again. They quite literally do this 3 separate times, and every time they did this it just felt cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And by the time Vander is actually completely gone and we're just left with Warwick, I was just completely over it. I just felt absolutely nothing for what once was a great character. And somehow the writers of Arcane Season 2 managed to make Violet and Jinx's final fight versus their father figure Vander just super meaningless. But now that that's all said and done, I actually want to talk about the bigger issue regarding Vander's character arc in Season 2. I find it so unbelievably frustrating that the writers of Arcane Season 2 found a way to damage Vander's arc from Season 1. The best part of Vander in Season 1 is the fact that he makes the conscious decision to try and be a better person for the next generation. He's not doing this because he feels he has to, he's not doing this because he made a promise to someone. He decides to take in 2 orphan girls that he does not know and try his absolute best to bring them towards the light. And when I say 2 girls that he doesn't know, what I'm trying to say is I do not buy into Blisters and Bedrock, because that flashback scene cheapens the moment that Vander shares with Violet and Powder. Vander name-dropping Violet and promising that he will take care of Powder and Violet cheapens his arc in Season 1. His arc is no longer that of a man coming to terms with the damage of his ambition and deciding to make the harder and better decision for the future of 2 people he doesn't really know. Instead, he made a promise. He is on the hook to take care of these children. So Blisters and Bedrock as a whole just really cheapens Vander's arc in Season 1. But unfortunately, this isn't the end for what happens to Vander in Season 2. The writers of Arcane Season 2 really do in fact believe that if Vander delivered that message to Silko, everything would have been better. And it is genuinely so upsetting that they believe Vander in Season 1 to be such a stupid man. Vander giving Silko an I'm sorry note wouldn't change anything. And Vander of all people should understand this. He of all people should understand that the reason him and Silko were at odds to begin with wasn't really a personal issue. While it was probably a factor, the main reason was their difference in philosophy. They were both 2 very ambitious men with 2 very different views on the world at this point. And the reason that Vander tries to kill Silko is that he knows no matter what they say or do, this just won't be fixed. Their 2 very different goals will always be at odds with one another. Vander understands this, and tries to kill Silko because he disagrees with his philosophy, and doesn't want anyone else to be hurt because of it. So why on earth would he write this letter? And more importantly, why does the show try and tell us that this letter would work? Vander and Silko forgiving one another isn't the main problem. They would still be left in the same exact situation where they believe 2 very different things. And Vander believing that this letter really would have changed something makes the character dumber. The last thing I want to address with Vander is the alternate timeline. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because it ties in with the letter. It is implied that Silko received the letter and forgave Vander. And while that topic is definitely going to be saved for the Silko video that I'm going to be making soon, just the fact that Vander is here and agreeing with him also harms Vander as a character. And now that I'm really saying all this and getting it all out, I just can't believe they were able to pull this off. How do you let a character that was perfectly done, had an amazing arc, just collapse after his death? They just should have left him alone. And out of all the characters that unfortunately died with Season 2 of Arcane, this one might just be the most unfortunate because it was the most avoidable. So out of all of the characters that were unfortunately assassinated in Season 2 of Arcane, one of the most interesting cases has to be Sevika. Now Sevika was one of my personal favorite characters going into Season 2 because of what she represented in the story. When you first meet Sevika at the start of Season 1, you're kind of under the impression that she's going to be your typical thug or goon. Just another bruiser type character that probably won't make it to the end of the story and most definitely won't have a major impact on the plot itself. But to my surprise, this actually ends up not being the case at all. Sevika actually ends up having a lot of amazing character moments, with my personal favorite being when she actually gives Silko of all people advice on how to handle Jinx. Sevika also goes on an amazing character arc revolving on the themes of loyalty. How far should it go? What does it mean to her? And what does it mean to society as a whole? Her loyalty is challenged many times throughout Season 1. The first time being when it's challenged with Vander when she chooses to leave his side and go with Silko, and the second main time being when she's asked to sort of become a leader in her own right and betray Silko. In Act 1, she chooses to betray Vander and pledge her loyalty to Silko, and in Act 3, she actually chooses to double down on this decision, choosing to stay with Silko even though the odds are stacked against him, showing us that a character we once believed to be immoral and unloyal actually does have morals and stands up for what she believes in when push comes to shove. She goes on a very subtle but very full arc in Season 1. And going into Season 2, I really feel she represents not only Silko's ambition, but Zaun as a whole. She's a figure and a leader from a past generation that still believes in Silko's dream. And she is absolutely integral when it comes to the Piltover Zaun conflict that was a major part of Season 1, probably the biggest part of Season 1. So now let's go over what happens with Sevika in Season 2. Now for the first few episodes, she actually does get some pretty good moments. I absolutely adored the scene where she goes to talk to Silko and really vent out her frustration that he isn't around anymore, and I honestly believe that her budding relationship with Jinx was going to go somewhere. Now one thing that I was really looking forward to is they set up the fact that Sevika doesn't really know what happened to Silko. She believes that he isn't dead, that he's just somehow disappeared. And this, tied together with the fact that her and Jinx are now getting closer, was setting up a really great payoff where Jinx reveals somehow, or Sevika finds out, that Jinx is actually the one who killed Silko. And this is where my first major issue with Sevika's character arc in Season 2 comes in. She gets absolutely no form of payoff. In fact, Silko's death as a whole is somehow never mentioned and no one talks about it. Both Caitlyn and Violet know, and you'd think they'd be wanting to make it very apparent that the leader of Zaun has been killed. But they decide to tell absolutely no one for some reason, and because of that, no information ever gets to Sevika. And the main reason this happened is I believe they just didn't care about this plotline and decided not to give it the time that it deserved. But moving on, between episodes 3 and 6, we see that Isha, Jinx, and Sevika are developing a relationship. Sevika seems to not only care about Jinx, but actually really care for the child as well. And unfortunately, this is her only role in this span of episodes. That and hosting the dumbest rally that she possibly could have, with it being in broad daylight. Like, was she just asking to be captured? Again, characters that we know are intelligent and logical making absolutely preposterous and illogical decisions in Season 2 of Arcane. And that is quite literally all she does for this span of episodes. She talks to Jinx and Isha for a bit, and then hosts a rally, and that's it. And what makes this even crazier is this is significantly more screen time and moments than she gets in all of Act 3. Because in all of Act 3, we really only get 2 scenes with Sevika. A moment where she basically could have been anyone, even a common goon, leading the charge into Piltover, and then with one of the final scenes being her just sitting at the council table. Something that actually could have been quite interesting if it was given any amount of time to cook in the oven. Oh, and she would also need some lines. Sevika doesn't have one line in Act 3 of Arcane Season 2. So it's shown to us that Sevika is actually building a relationship with Jinx and Isha. So the creators are setting up something with Sevika that needs to be paid off when the show comes to a close. So how on earth did the writers of Arcane finish the show without giving us a scene between Sevika and Jinx where they talk about the fact that Isha is dead? Sevika is the only other person beside Jinx herself that actually had a relationship with Isha. So even though I am not the biggest fan of Isha herself, there could have been a really good scene here where Sevika and Jinx talk about the fact that their friend, someone they both had a shared relationship with, is now dead. But because Isha was just a plot device and the writers don't actually care about Sevika anymore, this never happens. And one of the reasons that I think Sevika just completely disappears in all of Act 3 of Arcane is they just stopped caring about the whole Piltover Zaun storyline. I guess the writers and creators just showed her sitting down and figured that would be enough to explain that things are kind of good now or are going to be getting better. But if we're being entirely honest, there is no confirmation that things will actually change for the better for Zaun just because Sevika gets a seat here. There would still be some political unrest, and because Sevika is in the heavy minority, anything she would try to say would just get outvoted. The political maneuvering was something that was a major part of Arcane Season 1, but the creators of Season 2 just didn't want to do it, so it didn't happen. And because Sevika was one of the most integral parts of that actual storyline, she gets killed alongside it. I really cannot get over the fact that there were so many different payoffs set up for Sevika, and none of them happen. One of the most important and main characters from Season 1 does not get a single line in the final act of the final season. What made Sevika so interesting to begin with is she was pitched to us as a normal run-of-the-mill goon, a brawler type. And she actually ended up being a really interesting, complicated character. Just to end Arcane Season 2 as a normal run-of-the-mill faceless goon. And now that I'm saying that out loud, that whole story is kind of symbolic of Arcane and League of Legends as a whole. In the pursuit of fan service and making money, they failed to do good. I think it's safe to say that after the conclusion of Arcane Season 2, Ekko, the boy savior, is a fan favorite. This is a character that people just absolutely adore. This is a character who people believe has the best ending in all of Arcane. I've even met people who aren't too happy with Season 2 of Arcane that say they really like Ekko and where his character concludes. And I couldn't disagree more. Ekko, like every other character in Season 2 of Arcane, is dumbed down compared to a Season 1 counterpart. Not only that, but it seems like the writers and producers of Arcane Season 2 forgot who Ekko was at his core to begin with. So first I'm going to quickly go over Ekko in Season 1, what matters to him and his importance in the story. When we're introduced to Ekko after the time skip, he seems to be one of the only people in all of Arcane who is acting purely altruistically. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say he is probably the most morally sound character. This is a young man who is filling shoes that he was not ready to fill. At a very young age he loses his father figure. 2 of his best friends are brutally murdered, one of them disappears for nearly a decade, who is also assumed dead, and the friend that he is closest with, Powder, not only plays a role in killing his 3 other friends, but then joins the side of the man who put this all together and directly killed Ekko's father. Now, one major theme throughout Arcane is how different people handle trauma. Violet is more prone to rage. She likes to use her fists to solve her problems. Powder/Jinx have a plethora of mental health issues, ranging from anxiety to schizophrenia and everything else in between. And Milo, who not enough people talk about, has a profound sense of insecurity. But what makes Ekko such an interesting character in this gigantic mess is even though he suffers from a lot of the same issues that these other characters suffer from, he comes out the other side a better person. A man who is absolutely dedicated to his community. Someone who at all times is just trying to create a better future for the next generation. He's trying to give the future children of Zaun the life that he never had. However, he faces a really difficult challenge. He needs to stop Jinx and Silko and he's not really sure how to do it. And unfortunately, he understands that words are not going to be able to fix everything. He's going to have to use some form of force. But what I really love so much about his decision is he doesn't really seem to be trying to kill any of Silko's goons. Maybe trying to immobilize them or knock them unconscious, but he's not actually shooting to kill. So in a very unique and beautiful way, he's even giving his enemies a second chance to be better people. And what makes this all the more better is he's not someone who's really trying to be a savior. At his core, in many ways, he's still just the little kid who wants to hang out with his friends. But it's these connections that he had and lost that lead him to be a better person. And because of this, he steps up, filling a void that was desperately needed of help in Zaun, beautifully symbolized by the tree that is in the center of his base. And not only that, even though he is jaded towards Piltover, he's willing to offer them a hand as well, being more than willing to reason with them. And that is why Ekko having a budding relationship with Heimerdinger works so well. It is someone from Zaun and someone from Piltover who are finally coming together in a very productive and healthy manner. And it's not something that happens out of force, it's something that happens out of kindness. Not only that, but Ekko's scene on the bridge is my favorite scene in all of Arcane. Ekko vs Jinx is one of the single most impressive moments that I have ever seen in fiction. Aside from just being super badass and really hype, you know everything you need to know about these characters and how they feel about one another in a short 2-minute sequence. That doesn't only provide something that's been built up to for episodes at this point, but also ties the story together in a very tragic and bittersweet moment. So with all that being said, I was really excited to see what they were going to do with this character for Season 2. So you can imagine my shock and disappointment when he's barely in the first 6 episodes, then practically gets his own episode in an alternate universe, in which he acts completely out of character, and then in the final 2 episodes he's just dumbed down to a Jinx love interest. Then, in a very uninteresting, convoluted, and nonsensical moment, he quite literally becomes the boy savior, and then his arc just ends. So let's quickly run through this step by step. For the first 6 episodes, he really doesn't do anything. He barely makes any appearances, and for the most part, he's just doing funny things with his new furry sidekick. He's used as somewhat comedic relief, but then I will say we actually do get an interesting scene in episode 3, where he decides to talk to Jace about what is happening to the tree. Now this might have actually been a really interesting plot point had they remembered to actually pay it off. And as some of you may remember, this tree is actually very important to Ekko. So important, in fact, that this is the last time we hear about it. Then, at the end of episode 3, he is teleported somewhere. He then spends all of Act 2 in the realm of who knows what's going on. And then we get the alternate universe episode, which is many people's favorite in the whole entire show. And this episode is disastrous for the character of Ekko. Firstly, he nearly murders alternate universe Powder immediately, and she's just sort of like, yeah, that's weird, but I guess it's okay. And then he goes on a very typical I'm in the wrong universe arc, where he acts crazy, scribbles stuff, and is trying to get home. And while there are sprinklings of stuff that could have been interesting, such as him looking at the bridge where he punched Powder, or his reunion with his father, it's all cheap. It is all surface level, it is all expected, and it is all boring. So now let's get to the real reason that everyone loves this episode so much, the relationship between our Ekko and some alternate universe powder. Am I the only one that finds it weird that Ekko is walking around in someone else's skin, dating their girlfriend? This whole quote-unquote relationship is just an absolute disaster. Not only is it unethical, it's out of character for Ekko. It has been over 7 years since he had an actual relationship with Powder. Beyond that, this girl that he is talking to is not the same person that his Powder would have become or was. So this thought process of he's getting to fall in love with someone that he would have fallen in love with in his own universe just doesn't work. This is an entirely different person. And this is also someone that he doesn't know. I think it would have been far more realistic for Ekko to really not want anything to do with Powder at first, due to the trauma response of what Jinx has put him through for nearly a decade. And instead of having them do this forced kiss just for fan service at the end of their story, I think it would have been much better if Ekko was just okay with them sort of being friends. I just feel that him falling in love with her is a whole load of bull. And not just that, but why is he even entertaining this? Our Ekko from Season 1 has things to do, places to be, and people to save. This is not the time or the place for wishy-washy relationship shenanigans. And then at the end of this episode, Heimerdinger dies. And Ekko is the only one who knows about this, and I want you to keep this in mind for later. So then, when Ekko returns to our universe, he somehow teleports straight to Jinx. Apparently he now cares far more about her, the person that he no longer knows and has been actively killing his loved ones. You would think that Ekko's first move when returning to his home universe would possibly be checking on his home that is the most important thing to him in Season 1. But no, instead we're going to settle for cheap fan service. And what makes this even better is it happens off screen. Because I guess why would they show a conversation that just doesn't make any fundamental sense? So then, not only does he turn Jinx to being a good guy, he then befriends her like nothing has changed from when they were children. Drawing on each other and making crop tops, cutting each other's hair. Earth to the writers of Arcane, this is not the same Powder from the alternate universe. This is a relationship that cannot work, too much has changed. But hey, it looks cool and it's good for the fans, so we're gonna keep it. And then, somehow, he just saves the world? Oh my god, this was just so dumb. Ekko, who was once a grounded character, straight up defies the laws of physics that have been set in the Arcane world, beats this massive army of robots who we've seen are extremely powerful, and saves the world. Hooray. Because this is exactly what I thought Season 1 of Arcane was leading to. Ekko saving the world. All the nuance of his character, all the conflict, all the complications, you know, all of the things that actually made the character really interesting. Nope, he just saves the world because he's the boy savior, now everyone clap and say yay. But now I actually want to talk about what we gain from the final scene with Ekko. Him sitting in the same spot that he sat with alternate universe Powder, reminiscing over the relationship that they could have had. Does Ekko mention or remember the certain scientist fuzzball that saves Ekko by sacrificing himself? Does Ekko remember or reminisce the character that he had a long relationship with throughout Season 1 and Season 2 that sacrificed himself to save Ekko? Nope. No mention of him. Do we get a beautiful scene where he checks on his home, interacts with his loved ones, makes sure they're okay? No, it's not like it was the most important part of his character all throughout Season 1. Do we get any sort of proper conclusion between him and Violet, another amazing relationship built up throughout Season 1? No, we do not. Anything and everything that made Ekko an interesting character in Season 1 is gone, and it has been replaced with shipping and fan service. And that is how the writers of Arcane Season 2 killed and replaced the original boy savior with a false one. So out of all of the characters in Season 1 of Arcane, Silko is by far one of the most intriguing. He is my personal favorite character in not only Season 1 of Arcane, but the whole show. Silko's story in Season 1 is very complicated. It's a story of a man using devious methods to accomplish a task greater than himself. A man that believes a certain amount of violence is necessary for peace. Silko in Season 1 is also a very complicated father figure. A man who is constantly manipulating his newfound child and tries to make her into his perfect image. But then you come to find out in his final few moments on screen that through all of this he did in fact love her, and that for all the problems and issues that she causes him, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, she's his daughter. Silko has one of the most complete arcs in all of fiction in my opinion. By the end of Arcane Season 1, you understand everything that makes this man tick from start to finish. He's powerful, he's intriguing, his dialogue is amazing. He is a character that touched the heart of many and had a very profound impact on not only the story of Arcane, but the fandom as well, igniting discussions about morality that would blaze onwards for years to come. And going into Season 2 of Arcane, if I'm being honest, he was the only character I wasn't worried about. His arc was already complete and it was practically perfect. So how could the writers go back in time and ruin a character that was already amazing? And somehow, to both my shock and disappointment, they found a way to do it. Silko does not get a lot of screen time in Season 2 of Arcane, with him only having a grand total of 6.5 minutes on screen, and not having any sort of dialogue for a third of it. So when discussing how the writers of Arcane found a way to destroy Silko's character, it really comes down to 3 crucial scenes. And when I use the word crucial, I'm not just talking about 3 things that are sort of important to Silko. I'm talking about 3 different moments that absolutely shatter the Silko we have in Season 1. Now the first thing that I want to bring up that I'm going to tie in later is the letter that Vander wanted to give Silko and never got the chance to. At the start of Act 2, Jinx and Violet find this letter that Vander wrote to Silko and never got to bring to him. And it's just basically one big I'm sorry for trying to kill Silko. And the reason that this letter is so disastrous is the writers actually believe that this letter would have worked and mended the relationship with Silko and Vander. Not only that, but they believe that if Silko received this letter, it would have put him on a right track, and he never would have committed the atrocities that he ends up committing in Season 1. And this just shows you that the writers of Arcane Season 2 fundamentally misunderstood Silko as a character. This letter that Vander wrote to Silko wouldn't have changed anything. Silko isn't going after Vander and trying to take control of Zaun because of a petty difference. He's not holding a petty grudge against Vander for trying to kill him. They have a major difference in philosophy. In fact, at the start of Season 1, Episode 3, Silko offers Vander a chance to join him, showcasing that what happened in the past between them is in the past for a reason and he wants to move forward. But he wants to move forward on his terms, with Vander agreeing with his ideology. But Vander doesn't agree, saying that he is just not that man anymore. And this I'm sorry note wouldn't solve any of these bigger problems. Now I've heard people make the argument that Silko would appreciate this, but I disagree. I think if anything, Silko would respect Vander more for doubling down on his action and sticking to what he believes in. I believe he might actually see this letter as Vander rolling over. Which brings us to my next point. One of the reasons Silko is going after Vander in the first place is because he's aware that he's working with Topside. And he finds this action absolutely disgusting. And this I'm sorry letter that the fandom and many of the writers of Arcane Season 2 believe would have fixed everything doesn't address any of these problems. I think in the best case scenario, Silko would go, thanks, but what now? We still have all these other issues we have to address. Now I usually like putting my videos in chronological order, but I really need to tie this in now. The alternate universe is why I find this letter so destructive. In the alternate universe, when Ekko asks Silko and Vander why all of a sudden they're friends, Silko goes, the best thing you can do as a person is have the power to forgive. And this is just such a catastrophic line. In this alternate universe, it is implied that Silko received the letter, and after Vi's death, they are somehow able to mend their relationship. But herein lies the issue. As I've stated previously, the letter does not solve anything. And the writers of Arcane making it so that this letter solves so many problems destroys so much of what makes Silko such a great character in those earlier episodes. But moving on, I think the true worst thing that happens to Silko in Season 2 of Arcane is the Blisters and Bedrock scene. And this scene is just an absolute disaster for Silko from front to back, and here is why. In Season 1, Episode 3, Silko is absolutely hell-bent on murdering all of the children, including Violet, who he would know is the daughter of his best friend. It also doesn't make any sense that he'd be criticizing Vander for taking in these children and insulting him about it if he knows the reason he's doing it is because he's on the hook. And you have to remember, Silko is not just an evildoer, he has very conscious reasoning behind his actions. More than anything, Silko respects people with large ambitions. He respects people that are willing to die for the cause, that are willing to fight for the cause. And you really mean to tell me he would now disrespect one of his best friends who died for the cause by trying to murder her children? Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't really make sense. Beyond that, when he turns the corner and sees Powder for the first time, he doesn't seem to know her. He just says, hello, little girl. He doesn't seem shocked to be seeing a familiar face. He doesn't give any emotional response indicative of that he knows who this is. I've also seen countless people make the argument that the reason Powder jumps into Silko's arms is because she's familiar with him. But if that's the case, why on earth would he be so shocked when she does it? And if he truly did know who she was, he would immediately try to leverage the fact that she's familiar with him. Silko's entire arc that he goes through in Season 1 is a reflection of what Vander goes through in the first episode. It is a man coming to terms with the costs of his ambition, a man choosing to father a child that he does not know, and growing as an individual because of their adopted child and adopted love. And I believe the Blisters and Bedrock scene retcons a lot of this, because it sums up all of their complex journeys into they were just on the hook the whole time anyway. This wasn't something they chose out of their own free will, out of the goodness of their hearts. It's they promised something, they were on the hook and they just had to do it to keep their word. Now, the last part of Silko's character that I want to discuss before ending this video is his final line to Jinx. Now, I will also be talking about this moment in depth in my future Jinx video, but I think it's important to bring up here regarding Silko as well. To put it in short, Silko basically tells Jinx that the only way to escape this violence is to just simply walk away. Now, I know in a very weird way, this isn't actually Silko, this is Jinx's contorted mind's conception of something that Silko would say, but in truth, my issue with this scene is this is just not something Silko would ever say to Jinx. So where is she getting this information? Where does she get this idea that this is something he would say? Silko was never one to walk away. He was always one to fight, always one to stand on your ambition. So do the writers of Arcane Season 2 believe that this is something he might have said to Jinx at some point in time? Because if so, that just shows another insane misunderstanding for how the character of Silko works. Especially consider the actual effect this has on Jinx, because this scene leads Jinx to doing something that I do not think Silko would have wanted for her. But yeah. Unfortunately, out of all of the characters that were killed by Season 2 of Arcane, this one was the most unexpected. This was the worst move they could have made. All they needed to do was just let him rest, and he would have ended a phenomenal character. But instead, they have to drag his corpse out of the river for fan service and member berries. And unfortunately, because of this, we're left with a far worse character than we would have had if they just left him alone. I will say though, as far as ignoring Season 2, this is the character that I'm going to ignore Season 2 the most with when I go back and watch Season 1 of Arcane. Because the character that we are presented with in Season 1, and the impact that he left me and the majority of the fanbase with, is very different from both the initial goals in creating Silko and the outcome of Season 2. This is a character that we were never really supposed to like, this is a character that was never really supposed to work, and this is a character they unfortunately ended up killing in the second half of their story. With that being said, I will always still have a soft spot in my heart for Season 1 Silko, and nothing will ever change that. It's just really quite unfortunate to see what he would end up becoming. I honestly believe that Jace has one of the most catastrophic and distressing arcs in all of fiction. You see, what really makes me so sad about this character is that when he was actually an amazing character, everyone in the fandom hated him for some reason. And I'm not talking about the bullshit that occurs in Episode 6, I'm talking about Jace through all of Season 1. And then, somehow, it feels like because the creators knew he was so hated, they decided to just assassinate the character in as many ways possible. Nothing Jace does throughout Season 2 of Arcane makes any sense. And nothing that actually happens to him or with him in the plot is ever consistent. So I'm sure you're all aware of the infamous line where Victor tells Jace, "In all timelines, you are the only one who can show me I am wrong." Why on earth would Jace immediately go back in time and murder him? Just from that episode alone, Act 3 is inconsistent with Act 2 in terms of Jace's arc. Also, do you remember in Episode 6 how he's kind of insane? He's like glitching, kind of like he's from across the Spider-Verse? Why is that just never relevant again? Was it just magically healed over time somehow? Because for me personally, I thought this was going to play a pretty major role in his final confrontation with Victor. And I've heard the argument that Jace kills Victor because it was all part of Victor's plan for this all to go well. But then that just takes away all of Jace's agency in the story, and he effectively just becomes a plot zombie for alternate universe Victor. Also, I'm not sure how many of you actually remember this, but Caitlyn is sort of Jace's sister. They were extremely close growing up, and the Hieramans are the ones who initially sponsored Jace to begin with. How did we go all of Arcane Season 2 without seeing some sort of bittersweet reunion between Caitlyn and Jace? Beyond the 30-second scene in Episode 1. I also just feel that Jace's quote-unquote conclusion with Mel was so lackluster, especially compared to their relationship in Season 1. Jace is a very interesting character in Season 1. His character work is very meticulous and very specific. It is his political power and political maneuvering that makes him so interesting. He was a scientist who was being forced to play politician, and he was very green around the ears. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm not even sure what to call Jace in Season 2 to properly characterize him, because he loses all of what made him Jace to begin with. But then in the final moments we're supposed to believe that this is still our Jace from Season 1 that loved Victor. I just don't buy it. And maybe this is just a personal opinion, you guys can let me know in the comments down below, but I really don't like Jace's final message to the audience and Victor. To sum it up, he's answering a question that was asked in Season 1 as to whether Hextech is worth pursuing, and he basically comes to the conclusion that it was wrong to try and improve people's lives. It was wrong to try and cure Victor of his terminal illness because I guess that's just God's will? And then he just dies with Victor, basically saying, well, it goes wrong in every universe, so let's die with it. And it's like, are you really going to look me straight in the face and tell me there's no universe where Hextech actually works out and they change lives for the better? And if that's true, what are you trying to say about technological advances in our own society? All in all, somehow the writers of Arcane Season 2 managed to take away all of Jace's agency. He is quite literally stripped of everything that made him Jace in Season 1, and by the end of Season 2, we're just left with a husk that sort of looks like Jace.
I'm Romaine Perkins.
Out of all of the characters in Season 1 of Arcane, Victor had to be one of the most intriguing, partially due to the not-so-unknown fact that he would transform into some sort of cyborg villain, but mainly due to just how well-written he was. Season 1 Victor was something special. Even though he had relatively low screen time compared to the rest of the main cast, he was a fan-favorite character. A character that left a mark on a lot of people, myself included. His story is one of progress, discovery, growth, decay, and most importantly, kindness. Victor is one of the most altruistic characters in the entire story, with every action that he takes being backed by the concept of helping others. By being from the Undercity, Victor has something unique that none of his other colleagues possess: perspective. Being a crippled individual that was forced to drink toxic water, Victor intrinsically understands the horrors that life currently has to offer a significant amount of people. So he dedicates his life to trying to mitigate these horrors. He isn't trying to be a scientist to find glory or have some sort of political power. He quite simply just wants to use his intellect to help people. And this is the main reason he decides to back Jace in the first place. He's not looking at Hextech as a chance for personal gain, he's looking at it on a macro scale, something that can cause the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. A great way to describe Victor in Season 1 is a utilitarian. And in short, a utilitarian is an individual who believes the right course of action is the one that produces the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. And while this line of thinking is linked to an intrinsic goodness in Victor, utilitarianism is often linked with a slippery slope. This unfortunate reality is constantly shown through Victor's habits of pushing boundaries even when warned not to, often overlooking potential dangers of his discoveries. One phenomenal example of this occurs early in Season 1, when his laser nearly slices this fuzzball in half, with this scene accomplishing 3 separate things. It showcases the dangers of such technology while also demonstrating how dissatisfied Victor is to hear that it needs more time to be tested. And it's also just a cool moment of fan service hinting at the arm that he will eventually have. Throughout Season 1, Victor is very much in a rush. He's constantly pushing boundaries as fast as humanly possible, losing sleep, shutting out others, sacrificing relationships, and unfortunately, hurting people in the process. But what makes this story so compelling is why Victor is in such a rush in the first place. Most mad scientist tropes in media often portray the mad scientist in disarray due to a lust for power. But Victor is different. Victor is dying, rapidly, and he knows deep down that he hasn't yet accomplished anything that has actually helped the Undercity. There is no great invention of Victor's that's transformed the world and changed the lives of people just like him. So because of his altruistic attitude, he begins to push harder than ever, pushing himself to the point where he starts to lose sight of his original goal. Avoiding his loved ones and ignoring the advice and expertise of his mentor, he begins to push the Hex Core. Even though he's very aware of the potential consequences of dabbling with such unstable compounds, he continues forward. He knows he's a doomed man, so he doesn't really care what happens to him. The dangers of it are minimal compared to the potential great that could come from his sacrifice. I mean, what is the life of a crippled, doomed man compared to the potential of helping thousands? Unfortunately though, in a pivotal moment in the story, Victor's carelessness catches up to him. In ignoring all the warnings from his mentors, the Hex Core has become uncontrollable. And in blocking out all of his loved ones, he failed to see the impact that he had already left on someone. Sigh represents the impact that Victor had already had, the good that the crippled boy from the Undercity had already accomplished. But because Victor was blinded by ambition, he overlooked the good that he had already accomplished and failed to understand the true dangers of his actions. And because of this, Sigh dies. Sky's death marks a turning point for Victor. In dying, she reminds him of his original goals and makes him understand the gravity of his actions. She gives him yet another unique perspective on the world. Victor now understands the dangers of innovation if precaution isn't used, and he accepts his fate as a doomed man, dedicating his final days to finally showing himself in the light, putting his faith in his friend to do the right thing for the Undercity, putting in motion the destruction of the Hex Core, which was his own personal greatness, for the chance at doing something good. In the end, Victor regained his perspective, stuck to what he originally believed in, and accepted the consequences of his actions. Except unfortunately, that isn't where Victor's story ends. Victor's story in Season 2 is just quite unfortunate, and it all begins with his initial scene. Now I will give props where I feel it's deserved. In the initial opening where Jace betrays Victor's wishes and uses the Hex Core to save him is a really great scene. It showcases just how panicked, in a very complicated way, selfish Jace is, and I was genuinely really excited to see where this would go. Unfortunately, however, from the moment Victor gets out of the Hex Core, his character arc starts going down a downward trajectory. After first stepping out of the Hex Core, Victor is noticeably different. Aside from the drastic change in his physical appearance, there has clearly been a significant change in his mental state. He seems very distant and far away from us, almost like all the warmth, friendship, and joy that our Victor once had has been pushed to the back of Victor's mind, in favor of a more robotic and seemingly objective being. Now this scene where Jace and Victor have their big breakup is very complicated. First of all, I actually think Jace's words and development here are phenomenal, with him expressing all of the complexity and emotional disarray that would come with the position he is currently in. My issue with this scene is Victor's reaction and his reasoning for leaving Jace behind. He says his reasoning for leaving Jace is that their paths divided a long time ago, and that what mainly kept them together was just affection for one another. Now I believe what he's trying to say is that at this point, him and Jace just have two different goals, but that just simply isn't true. It's as if Victor thinks he's talking to the Jace in episode 7 of season 1, and not the Jace at the end of episode 9. So let's quickly go over what they say to one another. Jace tells Victor that he's resigning from the council, that he was wrong to leave Victor, and that there is in fact potential for the Hex Core and Hextech to do good. Not only that, but by episode 9, Victor and Jace's ambitions were finally realigning. The amazing line, "In the pursuit of great, we fail to do good," has a profound effect on Jace and causes him to revert back to trying to actually help people. This scene between them directly leads to Jace trying to help the Undercity and brokering the peace deal with Silko. Also, the only reason that Victor is injured in the first place is because Jace is finally bringing him to the council meetings, showing both the audience and Victor that for the first time in a while, they are on a more level playing field. So with all that being said, when Victor says that their paths divided a long time ago, and that all that held them together was affection, he's forgetting everything that happened between them after Sky's death. It wasn't affection that brought them back together, it was understanding a mutual perspective. Now, I want to say that Victor being in the wrong and misunderstanding their relationship could be an interesting plot point if handled with the understanding that he is in fact wrong. But the real problem here is that the writers themselves believe what Victor is saying. And that brings us to the first really major crack in Victor's character arc. The writers really don't understand his relationship with Jace. Now for the next few episodes, Victor doesn't really have a lot to do until his final scene of Act 1. With him basically just walking around the Undercity with some not so subtle references to him being Jesus, just looking around and really taking in what the Undercity has to offer at its very worst. And then he just starts saving people out of nowhere, and like, how? What? How on earth is he doing this? This is something that I've yet to see anyone ask or talk about, but is there any actual explanation for how this is happening other than Victor does magic stuff now? Because I swear, other than the fact that he needs some sort of power bank, Arcane offers no in-universe explanation for how Victor actually accomplishes any of these godlike tasks. Season 1, I guess, gives the closest thing to an answer by saying the Hex Core is able to alter matter, but that's legitimately all we get regarding the interworkings of this power. And that just honestly really sucks, because one of the things that made Arcane so wonderful was how the world and the way things worked in the world had rules. Shimmer and Hextech both have their own set of consequences and benefits that are explained to us both through exposition and visual tools. And the politics of Piltover and Zaun also had a clear power structure that was again explained through dialogue and visuals. But with Victor's story, this whole concept is just absent. Any sense of grounding, any sense of reality just flies out the window immediately. And before someone leaves the comment saying, it's magic, of course it's not real, that's not my point. A story can include practically any form of magic and still have it feel grounded as long as the magic system itself fits into the world that it is set in. But this doesn't happen for Victor. In a short 2 episodes, he goes from a man on death's door who's fully conscious of his role in the story to just simply a god. And the only explanation that we get is the hex core did something to him. And that just feels so lazy. Now I want to say, one of the biggest issues for Arcane Season 2 in general is the pacing is horrendous. And already, as you can see, Victor is the character who gets hit by this the hardest. Moving on, the next block of scenes that we get with Victor are in the compound. And what's very interesting is somehow Victor seems to be sort of back to normal in terms of his personality. I mean, don't get me wrong, at this point Victor is God, and that definitely is far off from where he is at the end of Season 1, but at least in a way here he presents himself and feels and seems more significantly adjusted than he was just an episode previously. He just seems more like our usual Victor in the way he presents himself. And what's so crazy about this is how this potential development for Victor happens off screen. Maybe it could have been interesting to see Victor wrestle with this newfound power and have to rediscover himself and his personality through beating the ego of the Hex Core. But I guess we'll never know, since any semblance of development for this character happened during a time jump. So instead, I'm just left with another moment from Victor that feels jarring. During all 3 scenes with Victor in Act 2, I was just confused, asking myself questions such as, how are you doing this? Why are you more normal all of a sudden? What are your plans for the future? And again, how are you doing all of this? Now I want to quickly draw your attention to this very interesting statistic that I found. Throughout all of Arcane Season 2, Victor gets a grand total of 57 minutes on screen. Just with that alone, it's so insane. But what's even crazier is he gets 25 of these 27 minutes in the final act. So by the end of Act 2, he has a grand total of 32 minutes on screen. But remember, there are a few scenes of him just walking around without any dialogue, and those count to those 32 minutes. So what I'm trying to get at here is in less than half an hour, the writers of Arcane took Victor from a man on death's door to actual Jesus who has quote-unquote saved hundreds of people's lives, built an entire community, has godlike powers, and understands all of this somehow. What on earth is going on here? That is an unbelievable amount of stuff to get through in no time at all. And unfortunately, because of this breakneck speed, and frankly, an overambitious story in terms of scope, any amount of nuance and characterization gets tossed to the wind in favor of spectacle. Now the next major scene with Victor is when Jace blows a hole through his chest, and he gives this monologue where he basically gives up on humanity. Now I want to actually break down what he's saying here, and to put it exactly, his whole point is that humanity is doomed because of human nature. And this is one of the most common and overused conclusions in storytelling. Humanity is bad because once you discover love, you will inevitably discover hate. And in all honesty, I just find this so disappointing that this was the conclusion our Victor from Season 1 comes to, because it's just so boring. And to put it simply, the line, "In the pursuit of great, we fail to do good," while much simpler in terms of length, is significantly more complex and emotionally impactful than the monologue he delivers at the end of episode 6. Now one little detail that everyone loved about this episode is how Victor held on to the little gear that him and Jace pushed during their first experiment together. And honestly, this being here just raises so many questions. First of all, how on earth did he even get this? My only thought was maybe it was in the book he grabbed, but even then, why would he hold on to it? You're really going to tell me that after telling Jace off and shunning him, Victor took the time to grab a memento to remember their relationship by? And this little detail brings me to one of Victor's biggest issues in Season 2. His character is just so inconsistent. In every act, he's a completely different person. He acts completely different, he says completely different things, he now often contradicts things and actions he took previously, and just to put it simply, there is absolutely no continuity whatsoever with this character. Now with all that being said, we have now entered Act 3, and even though these last two acts were pretty disastrous for Victor's character, the final one puts them both to shame. In this act, Victor comes to the conclusion that he has to take over the world and put everyone in an infinite Tsukuyomi. He decides that the glorious evolution he must have is creating a hive mind where everyone loses all freedom to choose because freedom and love are the reasons for hate and war. And I just want to say, this is such a lazy and overdone trope to give what once was such an amazing, complicated, human character. But yeah, through unexplained, singed plugging stuff in, and Warwick juice, Victor comes back, fully evolved, and decides to take over the world. Victor then raises an army of robots to do his bidding, which is a statement I can't believe I'm saying out loud, and then he goes to have his final confrontation with Jace, in which we're shown Victor's final evolved form, and he very easily overpowers Jace, which brings us to what I would consider one of the strangest scenes in all of Arcane. When Victor and Jace are in the hive mind, they have a very interesting conversation, in which Victor says that he's doing all of this because human emotion clashes with judgment, which is again a boring statement. Then Jace says he was never broken, which is an odd thing to say since that has nothing to do with what Victor was actually talking about. Then Jace hugs Victor and we get a flashback, and in this flashback we discover that the person in the hood who saved Jace's life when he was a child and sent him back was actually Victor all along. And I absolutely despise this scene. Victor tells Jace that the reason he saved him in the first place was because turns out having a hive mind makes life super boring, and that in all timelines, Jace is the only person who could show him this truth before it's too late. Now, issue number 1 with this scene is how dumb our hyper-intelligent scientist Victor is acting. It should be common sense that creating a hive mind in which all personality is absent would make life super boring and meaningless. Now, I know I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but you see, Victor is. Victor is a genius, so how on earth does he not understand this before committing to it? Beyond that, the concept of Victor sending Jace back in time in it of itself is very confusing. Does this mean Victor is retroactively trying to fix one timeline that's already broken? Because that's what I'm assuming since Jace is in the exact same spot he was when Victor sent him back. Which means that the Victor we see in the flashback is actually the same Victor we've had through seasons 1 and 2. But then what about all the other Jaces who Victor gives stones to? Does the same thing happen in their universe as well? So we just have a multiverse where these events keep happening? Also, what is their conclusion about Hextech? Since they decide to quote-unquote end it together, should we as people not pursue advancement because it has potential dangers? Should we just never take risks? Should we never try and better people's lives? Should we just accept that sometimes things suck and just stagnate on that? What is your final message, Arcane? What is it that you're trying to tell me? And yet again, I think the most important question I have to ask is how on earth did we even get to this point? In under a single hour, the writers of Arcane attempted to bring a character who is very grounded in reality to an actual omnipotent god. And then they just kill him? And it just didn't work. In trying to make a great character with a large scope that would defy antagonists for generations, they forgot to actually tell the story of the character we already knew. The complex, nuanced, fun, kind, and altruistic character we knew to be Victor gets replaced by this being that could really have been anyone. And that's just honestly such a shame, because I really thought this character was going to be something special. And ironically enough, Victor's best line from season 1 sums up his entire character arc in season 2.
We lost ourselves, lost our dream. In the pursuit of great, we failed to do good.
If you've made it to the end of this video, or you just skipped to the end, thank you so much for watching. It really means the world to me that so many people enjoy my Arcane content and like hearing what I have to say. If you want to check out some more of my content, I'd recommend my over hour-long Jinx analysis that I did last month. Between these two videos, I put my entire heart and soul into discussing Season 2 of Arcane, and I don't plan on stopping. I have grown a lot as an individual and as a creator in analyzing and discussing Arcane Season 2. And I owe a lot of personal gratitude to Season 1 of Arcane for lighting this fire under me so many months ago. The only thing I would ask of returning subscribers or people seeing my content for the first time, let me know what else you want to see from my content, whether it be Arcane or other TV shows you'd like me to review, because I do like talking about other stuff outside of Arcane, and I will be sure to make whatever content you guys would like to see from me. I also have a Discord server that I have to make a point to be more active in, but you can always join that and DM me on there if you ever want to have a personal conversation. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I will catch you all in the next video. Peace. I just want to say, after making this entire video, and the whole Jinx video, I kind of feel like Thanos at the end of Infinity War when he's just like resting with the crops. I'm like, just watch the sunrise on a grateful universe now. The damage is done. The deed is done.